Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you on January 10th of 2022 to talk about gun control. It's a very important issue. It's one of the big issues that we speak about often on this channel, and I think it's something that needs to be discussed. It's really interesting to see what's going on, especially in New York State, especially in 2022, where we have the midterm elections coming with so many elected officials up for re-election. So we're going to go into this a little bit. But first, I do want to mention, if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you and we thank you for joining us. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We go on to all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to receive your chats, your text, and your phone calls to tell us what you think about the issues that are affecting us all. Not just from New York, not just from the United States, but from anywhere in the world. Because we believe in your right to free speech. We believe it is an unalienable right of everyone by birth, regardless of what your government thinks, regardless of what the internet overlords think. And we will, every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, hear your voice and the issues that you think are important. We hope you will join us. With that said, let's take a look at what's going on in gun control in New York, because I think it's important. New York is the second biggest progressive state in the nation. It is bluer than blue every year, and very often, either in California or New York, the issues and the ideas, the types of laws that will sweep the nation often start in either California or New York, and then flow out from there to other far less progressive states, and eventually, in many cases, to the entire country. So, in understanding what's going on in New York, we understand what's going to happen to the future of the United States when we have a Democratic rule in the White House and in Congress. That said, let's take a look at this. Now, you may be aware that in New York State in 2021, there was a change in our governor. The former governor, Andrew Cuomo, who was removed in disgrace because of 11 sexual assault cases, and the death of 16,000 New York State residents in nursing homes, left New York with an appointed governor, Kathy Hochul. Now, no one really knew who Kathy Hochul was. She was the lieutenant governor for New York, and she was unknown. No one knew where she stood. No one really ever heard from her because she was in the shadow of Andrew Cuomo. In September of 2021, the majority of the population of New York actually got to hear Kathy Hochul for the first time, got to understand some of her points of view for the very first time. And it was a surprising thing because no one knew where she stood on really any issue. And one of the big issues was gun control and the police, whether she was one of those who believed in removing the rights of American citizens from being able to exercise their Second Amendment right, as well as did she believe in defunding the police, a very big issue, a very big issue among the progressive wing of the Democratic Party in New York State. And to that, we know, and we can look back, looking at September 23rd of 2021, appointed Governor Kathy Hochul stated that, and I quote, "We do not support defund the police. No one in my administration does." That's the catchphrase. That was a catchphrase that had very negative connotations. She doesn't believe in defunding the police. These are her words to the New York City residents, New York State residents. She's speaking to us and saying, no one that is attached to the Kathy Hochul administration of New York wants to defund the police. That was on September 23rd. That kind of flies in the face of the news that we found out on August 28th, that her lieutenant governor, Brian Benjamin, who was a former state senator, is an advocate of defunding the police. In fact, he said, and I quote, "I support the movement to defund the police because I believe that there are parts of the New York Police Department budget that are not essential for public safety." He goes on to say, "Our goal must be to use the powers of the office to prioritize more public safety measures, not more law enforcement." Lieutenant Governor Benjamin went on to say that he also supported the state's disastrous bail reform laws and plans to close Rikers Island. Therefore, we can see that Lieutenant Governor Benjamin is a far-left activist. He is a proponent of defunding the police. He is an advocate of bail reform, issues that we've seen plague New York State and increase the net crime in New York State. These are facts. They're indisputable. And we only need to look at the New York GIVE report, that is an annual report of gun-involved violence elimination, shooting incidents, shooting victims, and individuals killed by gun violence. And this is data going through November 30th of 2021. The final report has not been issued. This was issued on December 10th of 2021. And we can see, and looking this over, for 17 metropolitan cities, including New York City, for the state of New York, we had a 6.3% increase in the number of shooting incidents involving injury. We saw that there was a 5.3% increase in the number of shooting victims, not including December. Now, the really important thing to understand about that is that in 2020, we had a 74% increase. So the increase in 2021 was on top of the 70% increase in shooting in incidents involving injury in New York State. And to look at the number of shooting victims, that's the increase of 5.3% in 2021 is on top of the 82% increase that we saw in 2020. So there was a massive and significant and continued increase in the net gun violence in New York State. But yet we have a lieutenant governor who wants to defund the police or reimagine the police or reallocate funding for the police. There are several ways that the news media and politicians like to word this, but the essential, at the end of the day, in every example we have ever seen in every state and every city that has implemented it, it has always resulted in the same exact net result: fewer police. Less police officers, less law enforcement to be able to enforce the laws and to protect the public. That is a fact. That is consistent in every single state, in every single city that has elected and tried the social experiment of defunding the police or reimagining the police or reallocating police funding. It's always the same. So given that, we have a question. We have appointed Governor Hochul saying she doesn't want to defund the police. She has a lieutenant governor that she picked who does want to defund the police. It makes us wonder what's going on. Well, this is 2022 now, and this is an election year. And Democrats are desperate. They are desperate to try and find a win. They are desperate to be able to hold on to their power, even in the bluest of blue states, because New York State is bleeding people like crazy. New York State has been losing people since 1958, every single year, every single decade, most notably during the Cuomo administration, but continuing to have massive losses of people, population, under appointed Governor Kathy Hochul. And you can see that here, coming from U.S. News, we can see that the top states people moved away from, that they left, that they exited: New Jersey, Illinois, and New York. Gee, why would we think that? New Jersey, Chicago, and New York City. Yeah. And 63% of the population were leaving New York State. This is higher than even in California. And it's kind of interesting because New York State, to be exact, and this is coming from New York Magazine, This was on December 21st of 2021. As they reported, even though the census data, which includes illegal aliens, which helped New York State in 2020 to maintain its population and only lose one congressional seat, showed that the census data showed that New York State lost 319,000 people from July of 2020 to July of 2021, which means we may have lost even more people by December. That was the leading population, the most significant population decline of any state at a loss of 1.9% of the population. That's insane. And when we take into account and take out the illegal aliens, which propped up New York State's population numbers, the number is actually 352,185 residents. I want you to understand that. That's more than most cities. New York State has lost a rather large city, the entire population, entire, top to bottom, just gone. They walked away from New York State under Governor Kathy Hochul. She's done that bad, as did her predecessor, the disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo. And I bring all of that up, and I think it's important to understand, because we have to understand, what is Kathy Hochul going to do about gun control? She wants to make this New York State safer for the public. At least that's what she keeps telling us. As we see, when she was speaking and quoted by Spectrum News on January 5th, appointed Governor Hochul says that she will form a new consortium between New York State Police, the NYPD, and other law enforcement agencies, including neighboring states, to trace guns used in crimes and stop the flow of guns into our state. She believes in beefing up efforts to use social media to find potential threats and criminal activity, and the creation of gun intelligence centers across the state. And she wants to use, she backs reforms of the criminal justice system, such as sealing felonies and misdemeanor criminal records, and backing college tuition for prisoners. Does that sound like that's something that's going to help? Is this going to lower the crime? Because we should take a look at this. And I really want to take a look at this because, first of all, let's debunk the obvious things that don't really help. When she says she wants to use social media to find potential threats, well, that doesn't always work. As we know, and as being reported by the Daily Mail out of the United Kingdom and the New York Post, and seemingly no other news agency in the United States, we know that what is suspected to be a Antifa member was out with pipe bombs trying to potentially kill people in Florida, and they had no social media exposure. So saying that we're going to track people by social media doesn't really mean you're necessarily going to stop anyone. And that also requires that someone notices it. In fact, to be able to look at social media, to use that as a tool, means that people's privacy may be invaded. It is introducing the government into people's personal lives, tracking everyone. Can you imagine New York State tracking everyone on their social media, tracking every conversation that you have, every organization that you may look up, every article that you may read? It sounds like a Fourth Amendment privacy violation. And that's her back door into that, in creating more government to intrude on individuals' privacy, with no guarantee that that's going to actually pay off. Yes, often it does for some of the most disturbed individuals, but how many criminals go on Facebook to announce that they're going to rob a bank? How many carjackers go onto Twitter to announce that they're about to steal someone's car? How many Instagram posts do you see of someone running around saying, I'm going to mug somebody, here's the video of me doing it? Not very often. And in fact, I wish it was more prevalent so that we could actually arrest those individuals. But the reality is, that's not a realistic way to stop the average of crimes. Yes, some of the bigger situations, but to tell us that that's going to fix the problem, well, that's a lie. Now, I know you may not have even noticed this article because, again, not a lot of people were paying attention to it on January 5th when we heard from Kathy Hochul. And there were very few articles, although this came out today, and I know you can't see it. The Times Union has hidden it from everyone. So we actually had to go to the statements from appointed Governor Hochul on January 5th, where she announced a 3-part agenda to prevent and reduce gun violence and violent crime throughout New York State, because this is an election year. So, of course, she's going to talk about gun violence. And she's going to tell us that she is going to make New York safe, much like we heard from Andrew Cuomo, who told us that if we passed the New York SAFE Act, New York would be safe. That when he passed the red flag laws and put that through the state legislature, that's the state assembly and the state senate, where it was voted on, and Democrats said, yes, this is absolutely going to stop violent crime. This is going to reduce gun violence in New York State. And as I showed you just before, they lied. That's not true. It's never worked. Their approach has always failed. Restricting the freedoms of individuals does not result in less crime. Criminals don't care. But Kathy Hochul, let's give her the opportunity. Let's look at what she is actually saying that she is going to do that is going to reduce the amount of crime in New York State and going to make people safer from gun violence from criminal individuals. She says, and I quote, "As governor, my most important responsibility is to keep New Yorkers safe. With incidents of gun violence and other violent crimes sadly increasing, my administration is laser focused on taking the necessary steps to protect New Yorkers. Our 3-pronged approach will tackle the rise in crime while also ensuring all New Yorkers, no matter their race or background, are treated with dignity and respect." Let's think about that statement that she made. First of all, she's admitting that all the other gun initiatives that have been produced by New York State over the last several decades, and in particular under the disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo's run, failed. None of them have worked. She's admitting that because crime has been increasing. She's also admitted in that statement, de facto, that defunding the police has failed. It failed in New York State just as it has failed in every other city and state that it has been tried in. That's what she has said. Very carefully worded, I give her that, but it failed, and she admits it. And she says that she has a 3-pronged approach that will stop the rise in crime. Her answer to crime can be resolved in just 3 things. That's all it takes. She just needs to do 3 things, and she can fix the problem, which I think is an oversimplification of the problem. But when she says our 3-pronged approach will tackle the rise of crime, she's saying you just need to do 3 things, and that will fix crime in New York State. And she goes on to say, no matter the race or background, well, when there are laws being, what laws is she thinking of that would be specific to someone's race? It's been a long time since 1950. In fact, this is 2021. That's 70 years ago. I'm pretty sure laws are no longer race specific. We've moved ahead of that. We've moved ahead of that a long time ago in my lifetime. So I'm pretty sure that was to be assumed. Let's look at what is she looking to do. Invest in public safety and fund state and local policing gun safety efforts. Well, that's a nice little statement. That's a nice headline of her first idea in the plan. Invest in public safety. What does that mean? Nothing. Really, that means nothing. It's an empty statement. Invest in public safety. Does that mean you're going to fix the bridges and the roads? Because crumbling bridges and roads are a danger to the public. You're going to replace the water lines in many of the cities and cities across New York State, which are falling apart. We have that infrastructure problem. Infrastructure is a danger. Are you spending money on that? Because that's public safety. What is she talking about? That doesn't make any sense. So if you're going just by the headline is meaningless. Let's look at what she actually says. Governor Hochul will triple the state's gun violence intelligence resources by adding a team of analysts who process gun tracing data to the New York State Intelligence Center. So she's going to spend a bunch of money to hire a bunch of people to crunch data. Okay, don't know exactly how that's supposed to make anyone safer, but it does tell us where some of the money she's going to spend this year is going. Your taxes are going up. She's hiring new people to be able to crunch data, which in and of itself does nothing. Let's go on. Governor Hochul will also double the number of community stabilization units to 16, increasing the state police's ability to partner with local enforcement to combat community-specific crime problems. Well, you would think that means we need more state police. Or she's saying, because she doesn't believe in increasing the number of police, as her lieutenant governor is absolutely against. So instead of increasing the number of police, she's going to increase the burden already existing on our police departments, on the state police, increasing their burden and overworking them, as well as increasing the amount of overtime that they would need to do, which of course means that New York State has to spend more money, which means you need to pay more in taxes. Okay, so she's going to overwork our law enforcement and spend more money doing it. Fine. To support local law enforcement, Governor Hochul will increase the funding for the Gun-Involved Violence Elimination Program. That's a program whose report we often quote, and in fact, we had just shown you. Again, this is the GIVE report that she's speaking about. That shows us that all the efforts of gun control from 2013, from 2018, all the bills in between have failed in New York State. Definitively. They have definitively failed. She goes on to say, as well as increasing investments in New York's crime analysis centers, which collect and share criminal intelligence and data with local law enforcement. She's going to have more people crunching numbers. That's a redundancy. She's already said that. She's saying it again. Finally, New York State will establish crime gun intelligence centers in every region of New York State, helping state police effectively solve major crimes and disrupt interstate trafficking of illegal arms, which means she's going to have more number crunchers. So in 3 different ways, she said that she's going to increase the number of analysts looking at data, which may or may not provide some information, and that she's going to overburden the existing law enforcement and make them work harder for the same money with no extra personnel. Because if she was going to hire someone, she would have said that right there. In fact, she would have said it in any one of these 3 items that she's presented. She would say, we're going to hire more state police. She did not say that. She didn't say we're going to hire more local police or enable grants for local communities with high crime rates to be able to get more law enforcement to help to control crime in their area. No, she's not doing any of that. She just wants a report telling us how bad the crime is, which is pretty useless. She goes on to say something else, and I'm going to come back to that point in just a moment about how effective is it to be able to, in fact, let me go to it right now. She says she's going to track where guns are coming from, because this is a big problem. That's why we have more gun crime in 2020 and 2021. That's why more people are being shot and injured and killed in New York State today, because of illegal trafficking of guns. Okay, let's think about that. Because this is a report, and I want you to see it. This is the report from the U.S. Department of Justice, the DOJ, released on January 2019, with data from 2016, the most recent data that we have. on prison, and this is a survey of prison inmates. These are people who have been caught committing crimes with a firearm, any crime committed with a firearm. And speaking of those individuals who have been convicted and are in prison, looking at them and detailing clearly for all people to see exactly how did they get the guns that they were using. And that means we're going to table 5 of the data from the Department of Justice of the United States. And what we find out is that the criminals who used a firearm in any crime, and they are now convicted of, only 10% actually bought a firearm. Whether it's at a gun shop, a pawn shop, there was virtually no one who did so at a flea market or a gun show. No, they got, of the people who went to a store and got a gun, which means that they had to go through the regular process that everyone has to go through to get a firearm. Only 10% of them actually did that. That's almost no one. Minimal. In fact, what was the main source for criminals to be able to get a firearm? Off the street, underground market. These are illegal guns that are coming from off the street in an illegal market. These are guns that were not purchased legally, which means they may have been stolen, they may have been bought in a different state and sold to someone somewhere else. They were sold by gangs that came from overseas, like over in Mexico. They came into the United States because the United States government, gave them the guns in the first place. We're not sure. It is an unknown source. It was somewhere randomly by other criminals. But yet we're told that this is going to help stop crime because Governor Hochul is going to find out what state they come from, which doesn't help us find out where the criminals actually got them from. Oh, the guns came from Chicago in Illinois. Does that tell us which gang sold those guns? Does it tell which gang member sold those guns? What about the Crips in California or the Bloods in California? What if it came from a gang in, I don't know, Mississippi? Does that help us? If we find out that they're getting the guns from Mexico and being imported in along with illegal aliens that have an open door policy in New York State because it is a sanctuary city, does that help us? Does that resolve the problem? I think not. But let's go on. Create the Interstate Gun Tracing Consortium. While there have been previous efforts to track illegal guns, they were often concentrated to an individual city, like Chicago or Baltimore or Detroit. For a more holistic approach, holistic? We're using holistics in government? I think not. Governor Hochul will direct the state police to form an interstate gun tracing consortium to facilitate the exchange of intelligence between localities and neighboring states. The Interstate Stun Tracing Consortium would focus on real-time intelligence exchange and operational coordination targeting gun interdiction. In other words, she's going to crunch data and find out where the guns are coming from, which is exactly what she said in the first point. Finally, New York State will establish gun crime intelligence centers in every region of New York State, helping state police effectively solve major crimes and disrupt interstate trafficking of illegal arms. She's going to do exactly what we've already been doing, that she already said she's going to be doing. So her 3-part plan is actually so far 2 parts. Well, no, it is 3 parts. Let's be fair. It is 3 parts because she's also going to overwork and overburden the state police. So that's point 1. She's going to overburden the state police. Point 2, she's going to get a bunch of data crunchers to look at the data to try and find out where guns are coming from, which we have been doing already, which has not been effective. And she's going to raise your taxes to be able to do these 2 items. So she's done 2 things so far she's promised. 3 things. Increase your taxes, have more people to do data that we already do that doesn't work, and she's going to increase the workload for the existing state police, which is a decreasing number because people are quitting because they don't want to work in New York State where they get blamed for everything. So that brings us to the third item. Okay, and in the third item, triple investment in community-based gun violence response. Let me read that again. Triple the investment, triple the amount of your tax dollars that she is going to spend on community-based gun violence response. Let's start off with the first thing. And I want to be very clear about this. That doesn't work. It does not work. Here we are. Look at the numbers from 2011 to 2020 and the current totals as of November in 2021. They do not work. In 2020, when we had a 74.5% increase in the number of shooting incidents involving injury, it does not work. In 2021, where we have increased that number even more, it does not work. It already exists, it's already being used, and it does not work. But she's going to spend more of your tax dollars, 3 times as much, to fund a program that does not work, but it makes progressives feel good. And that's the important thing, because it's an election year, and nothing gets votes like making your constituent base, your voting base, feel good. Make them feel like something's happening. Oh, I'm being taxed to death. Well, at least I can feel good because it's going to do something, right? They're doing something. Doesn't matter that what they're doing is ineffective and useless. Let me read the program itself. Appointed Governor Hochul will also invest in community-based prevention and response efforts that have been proven to curb gun violence. Even though the data, as I have just shown you from New York State itself, shows that that doesn't work. And if we look at the FBI's unified crime data, doesn't work in California, doesn't work in Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, it doesn't work. But let's go on. The major investment will expand hospital-based gun violence specialists to all 22 of New York State's trauma centers, expand the state's network of snug street outreach to Niagara Falls, Utica, and Schenectady, provide skills-based job readiness and work replacement training for at-risk youth involved in the state's violence interruption work, and launch a first-in-the-nation program to recruit and retain outreach workers. So that's a lot of gobbledygook. What does that actually mean? Besides the fact that we're going to triple down on something that hasn't worked definitively because the data shows us it's not working. Does not work in New York State. And they're not focusing on New York City, which has had the largest amount of crime increase of the counties and cities throughout New York State. No, she's going to Niagara Falls, Utica, and Schenectady. Could those counties be important for the 2022 election? That's for you to decide. But I want you to understand that's where she's targeting. And why only there? With 3 times the funding, don't you think that would be something that should be useful for the entire state? If this is such a vital item and this is so important, shouldn't we see that across the entire state, including New York City? You would think that would be the case. But no, this is a social experiment. And that experiment's only going to take place in Niagara Falls, in Utica, and Schenectady, which may or may not have a political backdrop to them, which would involve the 2022 midterm elections. But the thing that really caught me in this is hospital-based gun violence specialists. What in the hell does that mean? What is a hospital-based gun violence specialist? because that's really, really questioning. But I want to go on and mention gun violence has increased dramatically throughout the nation and New York, which is because of the pandemic, which is a lie. That's a lie. It's about defunding the police, not the pandemic. From 2019 to 2020, gun-involved homicides in New York increased nearly 80%. In response, they're going to build upon significant investments and actions, expand a variety of initiatives, including state and local enforcement capabilities, partnering with New York City and neighboring states, additional resources for community-based programs to stop gun violence, strengthen safety. Well, there's something that's missing in this, which we had seen in her comments, as seen in Spectrum News, that she's also doing criminal justice, which she left out of her report. Because, well, I understand why she left it out. What we have seen is that when we have reformed the criminal bail, when we had bail reform, it failed. And what she's talking about in particular is pretrial population. That's bail reform. That's what they're talking about, bail reform. And we see that the New York Police Department has already told us in March of 2020 that bail reform was a problem and one of the significant reasons for increased arrests in 6 different crime categories for the entire year that it was made available. Now, Human Rights Watch says, oh no, we don't have enough data for that. Well, when we look at other states that have done the same thing, the same kind of bail reform, in New Jersey, bail reform had no impact on reducing violent crime. In New Mexico, it had barely any effect. In Kentucky, there is no effect. So in 2 out of the 4 states that have done the bail reform with the excuse that this will reduce the crime that states see, 2 out of the 4 states say, no, it doesn't. Does not have an impact. In New York State, we increased crime. So in 3 out of the 4 states that have done it, we can say, no, it's not effective. It's not in the best interest of the public. It's actually a problem, which may explain why she's not mentioning bail reform in her 3 efforts to try and stop gun violence. Because bail reform doesn't stop crime. Definitively, it doesn't work. Not in New York State, not in the other states that it's been tried. And what we do see is, and what bail reform, and we say that bail reform has not worked, here is a recent January 7th, 3 days ago, we saw that a Cuban illegal alien in the United States was arrested on 28 felony fraud charges. 28 felony fraud charges. And was released. Justice Greenidge released this man, this illegal alien, on his own recognizance after being charged with 28 felony fraud charges because of bail reform. Because of bail reform. It fails. It doesn't work. And this is why New York State has made it very clear that there has been an increase in crime because of bail reform. But let's go back to the 3, well, not really 3, the plans that have come from Governor Hochul. We're going to track the guns. We're going to overwork the state police. And we're going to have hospital-based gun violence specialists. What are hospital-based gun violence specialists? When we look it up, it's the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention. It is the intervention. And I want you to understand what that is. It is called Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Programs. And to be very clear about that, I want you to see. It is 1, intervention. begins with a brief intervention in the emergency department or at the hospital bedside. So when you have been shot, when you have been stabbed, when you have been beaten into the ground and the dirt and taken to a hospital, you will then have a specialist come to your bedside, assuming you're not in a coma or unconscious from surgery, or that you have survived whatever injuries you have received, and then they will talk to you about what happened. How? Were you the victim? Were you the person who caused the crime? What's going on? That they will follow that up with intensive, long-term, community-based case management services in the months following the injury. So as you heal from being shot, from being stabbed, from being beaten so badly that you had to go to a hospital, they're going to come back and talk to you more about what happened. How did you get hurt? Why was someone in? Why were you being the criminal, or why were you being the victim? They're then going to follow that up with crisis intervention, linkages to community-based services, mentoring, home visits, follow-up assistance, and long-term case management that are provided to culturally competent frontline workers who are from the same or similar communities as the clients they serve. So if you are Black, if you are Hispanic, if you are Asian, you will get someone who is Black or Hispanic or Asian. You will get a social worker that looks the same skin tone as you. And they're going to come there and they're going to tell you about how bad it is that crime happens, that being a criminal isn't a good thing, and that being involved in drugs or other criminal activities is not in your best interest, because you can get hurt, because you can get killed, because you may have to hurt or kill other people. Do we really need social workers for this? Isn't this something basic? If we need to tell people this in a hospital and they didn't know beforehand that being a criminal is bad and that it could harm them or others, then we have failed as a society. We have completely failed as a culture, and there is a problem far bigger than any socialist is going to, or social worker is going to be able to resolve. This is stupid. The failure isn't at this point. We're dealing with the symptom, not the problem. But let's go further. Addressing the social determinants of health. These social workers will elevate the issues of revolving door violence while addressing inequity and building partnerships with communities and survivors of violence. So you have survived being stabbed, you have survived being shot, you have survived being mugged, beaten up, whatever the reason, whatever the problem was that put you into a hospital. Good for you. And you have had a social worker who has the same skin color of you, because no one else could possibly understand what it is to be shot or mugged or beaten down or to be involved, a victim of crime. No one can understand that unless they have the exact same skin color as you, because diversity. Okay. And in this, they are going to go and deal with the inequity of white people not also being shot and stabbed and beaten down by violence like you just did, even though, looking at the statistics, yes, they do. So does everyone in America and around the world. Violence and criminal activity are not restricted by race or gender or religion. It happens to everyone, everywhere in the world, and there is no specialization for any one group. Happens to everyone. Everyone needs help with that. And the problem is bigger than telling someone it's really bad. Crime is really bad. It sucks. I'm sorry. This is a stupid program to me. And I want you to understand that the people who are backing these kinds of ideas come out of one of the programs. And matter of fact, let me show you, because I want you to see this. These are the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention, one of the largest groups doing this, has membership. And I decided to just pick through two of the organizations just at random. But you can go through this list for yourself. And I am sure that you will find consistently, because Almost every one of the cities and states that this is happening in are large Democratic strongholds. But you can go through this for yourself and see if I am wrong. And what you will see are things like this. The Rochester Against Gun Violence Coalition. That's one of the groups in this organization. Okay? That they are here to tell people, to send social workers to tell you that crime is bad. The Rochester's Against Gun Violence Coalition. And let's take a look. And what do you see? The coalition is made up of Democrats. Councilman Willie Lightfoot, Legislator Sabrina Lamar. These are Democrats. These are elected Democrats. This is the Democratic Party. There has to be more about this because the public really doesn't know. I guarantee you don't know what these programs do. And so I had to look up one of the most cited reports on the benefits of a hospital-based peer intervention program for violently injured youth. This has been cited over 100 times. It is the top cited program that I can find on Google when I was searching for this information. And in looking at this report, which comes from 2007, the thing that is important, the result out of a total sample size of 154 patients. That's it. It is a study, a design that was from January of 1998 until June of 2003. There were 154 patients, which is a stupidly small sample size. And it was for a time of 18 months, a year and a half, an incredibly short period of time. So in an incredibly short period of time, with a sample of almost nobody, they were to find out participation in the hospital-based peer intervention program lowered the risk of criminal justice involvement. There was no effect on the risk of re-injury and death. What? It doesn't stop people from getting hurt or being dead? This program to stop violence doesn't stop violence. It doesn't stop people from dying. It doesn't stop people from being hurt. It stops people from being arrested. Subsequent violent criminal behavior was reduced by 7%. They stopped people being arrested, but they did not stop, and there was no effect on the risk of re-injury and death. You can read through the entire database yourself. Please look it over all you want, but the conclusion, the results are very clear. Because if you go and try and look up the gun-involved violence elimination, for some reason, New York State has not updated this report since 2019. When you go to the website and look at it, you'll see 2019's annual report. But they don't tell you anything. And they do have the SNUG. That's the program that we heard Governor Hochul says, we're going to do this. That's this program. That's this program. Hospital-based peer intervention is the SNUG program. Street Outreach Program uses public health model to address gun violence by identifying the source of violence, interrupting transmission, and offering services and support to those who wish to change their behavior. They're going to have social workers go to the victims and people who committed the crimes in the hospital and say, don't commit more crimes because crime is bad. And they're going to take money out of your pocket to spend for this. And they're already doing this in 12 different communities in Albany, the Bronx, Buffalo, Hempstead, Mount Vernon, Newburgh, Poughkeepsie, Rochester, Syracuse, Troy, the Wyandotte, and Yonkers. And they're going to double down in Syracuse and add 2 other areas to that program. And they're going to triple your taxes to send a social worker to someone's bed in a hospital to tell them violence is bad. And these are the 3 things that are going to stop gun violence in New York State. I've taken some time to go through this for you because the main news media will not. They have not gone into detail. They use the terms, they make it sound very nice. They use big words and they use convoluted paragraphs to hide essential information to you. I've shown you the data from New York State on violence in New York State. I have gone through the data that they have provided by New York State and the studies that they are using to create these programs to spend your money. I am deciphering the gobbledygook wordplay they use to get reelected in election after election after election. It sounds really nice. It is effectively, we're going to give criminals a hug, tell them you're being bad, and we're going to overwork the police without actually hiring anyone new. And you're going to pay a ton more in taxes, both because everyone else with their senses and the capability are getting out of Dodge, and you have to pay for it because New York State is broke. One of the largest economies in the world, in the top 20 largest economies of the world. There are countries, in fact, there are dozens of countries that do not spend as much money as New York State. And Kathy Hochul, with that enormous budget, decides that she's going to spend more of your tax dollars to give criminals a hug and overwork the police so that you will vote for her in 2022 because that sounds warm and fuzzy. If I have misunderstood this, if the data that I am presenting to the public is incorrect, I ask appointed Governor Kathy Hochul to come onto this program and to explain to me how I am incorrect. I am more than welcome to allow any state senator or any member of the state assembly, including Donna Lopardo, who I know personally, to come onto this program and to explain to me the information that I have just shown you and to try and tell me where this is not correct. It is not a challenge. I'm not trying to beat up on anyone. I'm not trying to make them look bad. I'm simply pointing out what they have told us doesn't work. It has never worked in the past. We have no reason to believe it will work in the future. And the data that we can see about its effectiveness at this moment has shown us historically it is a failure. So spending more money on this experiment has no reason to give us any confidence that it is going to do better. It may let some progressives fall asleep at night thinking things are great and we're doing something, but in all reality, every criminal who has read this and read through this has come to the same conclusion. They are as safe as they have ever been, and they have nothing to fear. And that is a problem for New York State. And if it's a problem in New York State, that means it's a problem in every other state around us. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think I've misunderstood the information. Maybe you think that it's worth the experiment. It's worth the extra tax money. And that this will stop people from running at the fullest, fastest extent that they can from New York State. This will stop the bleed, and this will stop the crime, and it will reverse the trends that we have seen consistently year over year, especially in the last 2 years. But I am open to hearing what you have to say. And I do hope that if you've made it this far, that you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our live stream, when we speak with you directly and you are able to text and call in and tell us your thoughts about this and other issues that impact you and everyone around the world.